Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Claire Oshetsky, author of Poor Dear, published by Echo and released today as we speak. Claire's the author of Chouette, which was longlisted for the 2022 Penn Faulkner Award for fiction, and she won the 2022 William Saroyan International Prize for Writing. Claire's also, as a scientist writer, has written for Wired, Technology Review, the New York Times, and other periodicals. She's the four-time recipient of the Article of the Year Award from the American Society of Journalists and Authors. So, Poor Dear is a story that normally I wouldn't give away, but every review that I have read from the New York Times to Goodreads does give it away. I still won't. Suffice it for me to say that two 4-year-old girls playing happily end their day in tragedy, one dead and the other mourning and in dread for the rest of her life, perhaps, and we only know her till she's 16. I've always thought of guilt, shame, grief, anxiety, worry, and even a lot of pain as useless emotions that serve no purpose. But lately, as I grow old, or actually am old, I can see that these feelings shape, for better or worse, the persons that evolve into the now. And Margaret is well on her way to shaping that adult life, along with a companion that is dire, but also needy in a way, and one that is given to us by Margaret, the most reliable of unreliable narrators. And Poor Dear might not disagree with that. So welcome, Claire, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for inviting me.
So we were talking earlier a little bit about metaphor. And so when I thought of the two titles of your book, and you may disagree now that I kind of get it, Chouette and Poor Dear, to me, the reader, as in my bookshop, people come in, they look at the cover of the book, they look at the title, and so they see Chouette, they think either Al or like cool, and they see Poor Dear, which I think is a courageous title, and they're not sure what it is because of the E instead of the A. So how did you mean them?
I can't really remember how I came to Chouette, so I'm not even going to answer that. It seems to work though. For the name Chouette is the name of a character in that novel that just seems a little bit owlish, and French for owl is Chouette, so I went with it. Poor Dear really evolved very slowly. I set the novel in Maine, and there's actually a mythological creature in Maine lore called the specter moose. For a long time, it was a moose in my story, and it just didn't quite work. And then out of the dialogue, I kept writing "Poor dear," where people were saying that to each other as an expression of sympathy. And it just kind of clicked one day that this mythological creature that I sort of appropriated from Maine legendary stories wasn't working, and I created this other ungulate of Poor Dear that became really central to the story.
Yeah, plus it would be really hard to fit a moose into a cheap motel room.
I know, it just changed everything in a good way when I got rid of that moose.
And plus you'd think of Bullwinkle, that wouldn't work.
I know, right? It was terrible. No, it wasn't working.
Well, one of the things I can tell, the way I can tell a book is really great, not that I don't feel this way about the philosophy anymore, but Ayn Rand, that I can still remember Ellsworth Toohey and Peter Keating and Howard Roark. When you remember the names, the book must have meant something to you. So I know Margaret Murphy, I know that she was called Bunny, I know Agnes Bickford, I know their mothers, Florence and Ruby, and I know later on we can talk about who's good and who's back maybe, but I lovely Aunt Polly. And I even remember the Hitchhikers, Penny Anglo and Sam Snickers. So look at all the names I remember. So why do you think that is? And where did you come up with Sam Snickers?
Well, I don't know. I think a lot of them are alliterative though, right?
Yeah.
And I I try to find names that work for the character. Two that you didn't mention are Mr. Blunt and Mr. Grubb, and they're sort of blunty and grubby. I just kind of named them as I see them, I guess. Margaret Murphy, I'm backtracking here. I wanted that family to be Irish Catholic because I in a class that changed my life on Western history, we read the Confession of St. Patrick. And I remember it was the first time I realized that St. Patrick, the guy, had an experience of the devil sitting on his chest. And he wasn't being metaphorical. We were talking about metaphorical. He was thinking, I'm describing to you that the devil came and was sitting on my chest, harassing me. And oh, I really like that imagery as a kind of really fierce Catholicism, and wanted to put that in the story somehow. And so that's why they're the Murphys instead of the Pogorzelskis or the whatever, you know.
Well, the thing about it is that, you know, Margaret, having also read the same book and the same scene, she confabulates the deer with this vision of what she saw. And normally you think of poor deer, you would think, okay, a fawn or something like that. But then you realize it's a combination of both images. And because she was 4 years old, she's confused as to the word deer as if it was a poor deer. But that was really well done because the satanic aspect of the creature really came through because of that. And that reminds me of how smart Margaret was and how little acknowledgement she got for not only her intelligence and her ability to read when her mother was her mother, and more succinctly sitting at that desk in the motel room is her cipher language. How did you come up with that?
I really wanted Margaret to be very interesting um, as a narrator and as a person. And yet I had put her in this very limiting environment.
Yeah.
And for reasons of the story, that she is stunted in her education and doesn't get a lot of exposure to reading. So what she does get is like continuously fairy tales, Sunday missal readings, the Confession of St. Patrick, and she keeps reading these things, and I think it translates into the story. In terms of the sentences themselves, that I really tried to mimic or create a rhythm that was close to Hans Christian Andersen stories or Bible passages. That's the way she writes. As far as making her writing incomprehensible, well, first she doesn't learn. She has this urge to write, and she kind of makes up her own language as a kid before she learns the alphabet, how to write the alphabet. And then she has secrets she wants to keep. So she continues as she's older to kind of have her language be really, really private, somewhere that she can describe her sufferings and her discoveries in a way that she won't be discovered.
And in terms of making her world small, those terms I used before, or maybe I didn't, about, like you say, the sky is perpetually yellow, the houses are all the same. That also closes things in, takes away color, it really takes away color, it takes away size, it takes away variation, and it makes it a very drab. Even the color of the mud they're playing in is gray, not brown.
Well, I hadn't thought about that. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you, because I knew you'd come up with things I hadn't really written on purpose. But that makes sense to me, Sam.
Yeah, yeah, and I love when writers, if I do, with not with an ego, but I love when writers, when I say something, they go, "Oh, yeah," and because it's fair that some of it is not known to you. That's why, again, a book is good. But it's funny that if you say the acrid smell of burning leaves, then I get kind of mad at you, because to me, the smell of burning leaves is one of the most evocative and lovely memories of my childhood. I don't think of it as acrid at all. I think of it as a mystical kind of beautiful smell. And I thought, I wonder why it's acrid to Margaret and to you, if it was acrid to Margaret.
I often, I think you're making me work hard about, like, why did I write that word? But I think I often choose a word for its sound sense more than its meaning. And acrid just sounded like it had the stresses and sort of the tension that I liked in that sentence.
Yeah, you know
So
what I did? When you said her hair was the color, you didn't say her hair was like the color, because that is a simile. You said her hair was the color of curdled milk. And I thought, okay, that makes me kind of like a little queasy, because curdled milk does. But then I looked up images of curdled milk, and they're okay. It's white, sometimes
a
yellow.
little bit yellow, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's not the worst color in the world, but you make it's like a portmanteau word for you. It serves a purpose. I mean, it's not calling it curdled milk because it, in my mind, because it looks like curdled milk, it's doing something else. It's doing double duty, the way I look at
Well,
it.
well, I'm not sure which double duty you mean, but I know I like the rhythm, like tut 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 tut. I like writing things that have a rhythm that pleases me.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it is. There is an element, or a great element, of poetry in the whole thing. And then it's funny too, because then you pick words, and the one because I read it on an iPad, I can count them. You use the word insouciant 8 times in that book, and you're doing it for a reason. And I think the reason is, one, to show Margaret's intelligence, just like she defines the word capacious for her lovely teacher, um, like the teacher in Matilda, Mrs. Honey. Um, yeah, so you decide, okay, this is the word I'm going to use to either mark things, or what was the word? Why'd you do that?
that's a word that a teacher once called my child. So it was in there in my storehouse of words that have charge for me. And also, it's a word that happens on this first spring day in the first chapter. And I was imagining these 2 4-year-old girls, 4 years old, they probably had no memory previously of a spring day. And it's a harsh environment, northern Maine. And just that feeling of intensity of that day, I wanted to have it be so memorable to Margaret. And a teacher comes out of the school in the scene and shouts at the girls, insouciant little girl. So I just thought that word would become this touchstone for Margaret. Like that was a word that she um, held on to as part of that memory. And because she's so limited in the words that she comes across in reading or in conversation in her daily life, it would be one of the few that had some rhythm and some unplain kind of meanings attached to it, and be attached to that memory of that day. So
Or
like all those things, every time the word comes up again, it's because she's remembering that scene, basically that time that she first heard the word.
Were you proud of your child when the teacher called them that, or were you upset? Because I
I
would be.
didn't know what it meant. I never heard of it before, so I wasn't anything. I was like, huh, it's insouciant. And I'm pretty sure my child had the same, like, oh, I wonder if that's good or bad, just knowing who my kid was at that time.
It's a great word. Hey, so was the third grade teacher Mr. Varley in your acknowledgement?
I'm not going to tell you who that is.
Okay. You saved two little girls. Third grade teacher did, kind of. The poor guy.
Yeah, I, you know, you haven't read Chouette yet, but the men do not come across very well in that book. And some people said to me, men can be nice too. So I wanted to have some nice men in this book, and he was one of them. That I just really like the idea of someone uh, really feeling the tragedy of that happens in the first chapter for many years to come, and tries to make it right. And yeah, I like that character a lot.
Yeah, but he's nice, but he suffers as much as Margaret does.
Well, that feels fair. I mean,
Oh,
they've gone through some stuff. I,
well,
I want to, I
I
want to
see.
say this, Sam. I really wanted to write this story of a very bad thing that happens to a child and have it end up redemptively. But I've never read a book, like a serious book, not like a Disney book, that does that, right? Like, yes, you can get through these things, and it'll be okay. And so I've read many books, and I went back to them where there's some kind of setup that way. One of them being very recently The Discomfort of Evening by Marika Lucas Reinefeld, which I maybe you've read.
No, I'll write it down though. Okay.
And in that book, there's a child who feels responsible for her brother's death, and it just is a very disturbing book, basically beautifully written and relentlessly disturbing. And there's a few others like that, like
Those all.
another Dutch author, actually. What's it called? You Have Me to Love by Jaap Robin, where he feels responsible for the child protagonist feels responsible for his father's death by drowning. And all of these are really, really, really difficult books to read that I came across, and I thought, well, let's see. But it was really hard because I wanted to be true to the experience, and I'm not sure if people would ever get over something like this, but I wanted them to. It's fiction, so.
Sometimes the reason I think I'm a bad interviewer is because I never ask anybody, what's your book about? Because I've read it and I just want to ask questions about it. So why don't we go back, since the reviews do say exactly what happened, which I don't think they should have done. That's just me. But talk about what happens that day, if you want to, and then maybe a little bit more about the characters, and then we can move on. Because we're trying to
Okay.
say, look, that's what we're here.
Okay. um I the story begins with a 16-year-old Margaret Murphy, who has finally decided she's going to come to terms with a day in her past. When she was 4 years old, she went out to play with her dear friend Agnes, and at the end of that day, Agnes is dead, and Margaret feels responsible for what happened. And the rest of the book is really her trying to come to terms with what happened that day, and trying to navigate what she's learning from her mother, and her environment. Like, everyone's lying to her in a very kind way about her friend going to a better place or passing on, or she'll be a guardian angel. And it really takes Margaret a long time to really understand what happened that day, and that she was, I don't know what the right word is, responsible,
Yeah.
negligent. There's some level of what she did, some level that she was too young to know the gravity of her choices, but she needs to deal with that, and the book is about her growing into that reality and confronting it and moving on.
Well, the thing I said earlier on about the most reliable of unreliable narrators is because as a reader and as her constant companion tells her she's a liar, and she starts out lying in her memoir of sorts, and lying again and lying again. And then like towards the end, when she talks about going to see Ruby, or wanting to get rid of Sam Snickers, okay, I thought, okay, that's really what happened. And it wasn't what happened at all. So then the reader goes, okay, now she's writing this. Is this what happens? Or is it not at all? And I don't know if that's something you did, or if it's just something I'm doing.
Questioning what really happened.
Yeah, you go 2 or 3 times into something, poor dear saying, no, stop lying. You need to tell the truth. And she does it again. Goes, no, you're still lying. Tell what really happened. And then she does it. He doesn't really acknowledge that she's telling the truth. So the reader is thinking, I don't know. I don't really know yet. So when she went to Ruby's house and her brother's all upset and all that, I thought, okay, yeah, that's great. I'm glad that they were able to work things out. Then I go, oh, no, it didn't happen. I feel bad.
I'm sorry, Sam. Yes, I'm very sorry that happened to you. I I was struggling as a storyteller to get to a place that felt reasonable and redemptive. And I also had this strong feeling that that would never happen in real life, that no one would ever really find a happy ending that had had such a terrible thing happen so early in life. So, how do you thread that needle or untie that knot? You create alternatives for the character, this child. She's still a child at 16, where she has to hold contradictory things in her mind. And I thought about this like as something I needed to solve, that she really needs to take a leap of faith to get over what happened that day, and to believe that something good can come of it, or that she can move on. And I kind of wanted the reader to go through that same process. I don't know yet if it works or not, but to have this, you really have to hold some contradictions in your head to get to the happy ending at the end, or at least she's on her way. And
Well,
that was just how I solved the technical problem of writing the story.
yeah. And it's like, you use the church, you use the Catholic Church, you use the confessional, and all the places she goes that her mother says, don't leave me ever because I need to keep an eye on you. But she goes all these places where she can't find her, and she's on the confessional floor. So if you use the metaphor of the confessional, you're saying that the leap of faith is what takes her closer to the truth as she gets older. And again, as the reader in the confessional, if she was doing that, first she would kind of say, well, I stole a pencil. Okay, say 5 Hail Marys and 5 Our Fathers. And she goes, oh, well, maybe that's enough. And then she goes back and back and back. And what you're saying, I think, is that eventually she goes back, even though she tried to early on, and her mother said, don't ever say that again. Then maybe she goes back someday and actually says exactly what happened. And the thing is, she was always totally innocent anyway.
Right. Yes. And in my mind as a writer, and I really do feel like I I don't really have a right to tell anyone what this story is about at this point. But as I was writing it, I was thinking, the Catholic Church doesn't really have any answers for her, because a mortal sin, you have to have intention. From the viewpoint of the Catholic faith, she is completely innocent, and yet she has this guilt, and it follows her, and it is embodied in this creature, the poor dear. And that felt like sort of a dead end to her and to me, that there's something about faith, at least as it was expressed in that small town, in a very strict kind of unimaginative Catholicism, that just didn't have the answers for her. She had to work out another story that made sense to her.
Yeah, that reminded me of something. I just slipped my mind. What was it? Sometimes there's things you put in. Well, the one phrase was that when they're playing in the mud, and Agnes's mother is at home in her bedroom weeping because she always had wanted to be a dancer, which has nothing to do with anything. But then for the reader, it conjures all kinds of things. Maybe their own regret at what they wanted to be and didn't become, or shapes the character of Ruby. And yeah, that's a difficult thing to do, and it's a kind of tour de force when you pull it off. But even that alone, it's almost like flash fiction. It is kind of flash fiction.
I'm not sure if I know how I write, like what is my style like, but I do know that it's sort of compressed, and my books are short,
Yeah.
and yeah, I like to, I don't want to bore anybody, and I do like to kind of compress a lot of information, and it did seem like shorthand for regret and for being a single mother, and having really no prospects of having anything change quickly in your life. And it felt reasonable that someone like this woman would have had a dream of had a creative life, like a dancer.
You do the same thing with Florence and Ruby, making it clear that Florence loves dearly, dearly, dearly loves Ruby. And when the letter is written by Ruby, that it's clear that love exists. And then the reader goes, wow, love. And it was really strong love. Is that love? What kind of love is that? Is there, I don't know, even a sensuous kind of romantic feeling between the two of them? And I thought there was. I thought that's what it was. And as a reader, I guess I'm allowed to do that, right?
Yeah, and I think it's reasonable, and I think that was in my head, but I also felt that in that time frame, which is mid-century, mid last century, that these women with this educational background and in this town would never really have the imagination to imagine that they could be together as lovers or as partners, and yet they would have these feelings. So that's how I imagined them, that it just wouldn't occur to them that there was a boundary there beyond which they could not imagine themselves.
That was good. If I had wrote that in the paper, I had to write about the book, I would have gotten an A on that part of it, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm pretty sure you'd get an A on every part, Sam.
Thanks. The other one that was one that I thought, okay, what is she saying? Does this happen? Does it really happen? Because it's already in a lie, not a lie, a story about Ruby saying, I was in that hospital that night, and I would have done that had the nurse not come in. And I thought, I still don't know whether she was in that room or not, because it was embedded in something else. Right?
Yes. Are you okay with that? Did I frustrate you? I mean, I haven't
No,
actually.
no, this is, why would you read a book that didn't do that? I mean,
Well,
well,
and it is all fiction, right? Like when people say, "Well, what was real?" And well, it's like it's all made up. It's just a fiction. The
yeah,
whole
but
thing is
no,
fiction.
but if half the people come in my bookstore looking for a beach read, I'm not going to read that because, and I can name some authors, but I'm not going to. But you read it and it's like, okay, this is it. Close it up. You're done. Here we are now, and I'm asking you questions that show you that I'm still reading the book, even though it's closed. And that's what you're looking for, I think. I mean, yes, that's what I think. Whether it's all the literature that you and I have around us, whether it's Dostoevsky or A.S. Byatt or Nabokov, you're doing the same thing. After you read Lolita or Transparent Things, you're still wondering, and I'm still wondering. So what more could you ask of yourself?
Well, I also like hearing what other people have decided the truth about this book is. I really, really enjoy reading reviews and talking to people that have read it. That they're like, this is what happened, and they're like really sure about it. Like, poor dear is the conscience of Margaret Murphy and is always right. But I made poor dear pretty fallible there,
Yeah.
especially in the end. So I kind of I don't want to upset people or annoy them or feel like I'm pulling the rug out, but I do want them to have this need to choose, like what they want to believe and how to navigate this moral terrible problem of how to deal with the harm we've caused others. How do we interpret it? How do we make sense of suffering? So yeah, I mean, I think that there's
Well,
multiple ways of interpreting the book, and that was purposeful. That you just kind of have to decide this is the way, this is the path that I'm going to read this book.
yeah, and if it's like in a simplistic fashion, connecting the dots, because you said leap of faith, the closest thing I can see to a leap of faith would be when poor dear is despondent in her bed. I imagine her stroking his fur and saying, okay, it's okay, it's okay. And that would be the leap of faith. That would be flipping it to me. And, just again, a reader's interpretation.
Well, every this is getting pretty deep into my twisty writing process, but
That's
um,
what I'm supposed to do.
if you assume, well, good, if you assume that that's true, that there's a 16-year-old person who's writing this down, um, where is she in the story? Like, I think of her that all these things have happened, or not, that she has to, she's using things that are happening in the present and putting those details in stories that happened long ago, according to her. And that was really fun for me, like the crackly mattress. So if in the present she's in this room with the crackly mattress because the proprietor doesn't want people to spill stuff or do stuff on the bed that ruins the mattress. So it's like, oh, it's got a plastic thing on it. It's a very cheap motel. And if that, and then she's like hearing that while she's rewriting, and she puts that detail in part of a story when she was 12 years old. So there's a lot of that I don't know if anybody cares, but I really enjoyed making that illusory reality. Like, if you really thought, hey, wait a minute, that didn't really happen, that there's some reason that she put it in a story that she's writing about her past.
Just the word crackly, like you were talking about earlier. One of the things I really liked, which no other reader will ever like, is that when you talked about the Pirate King. So for my two grandchildren, Lucy and James, I invented a whole land of the Pirate King. The Pirate King, and they were in constant war with the rats. And the rats would raid the Pirate King's ships, and then they would counterattack. And then when they would come up to the house, I would have dug holes with treasure chests and gems in it, and then the rats would write them letters, and I can't. Now they're 7 and 9, and I'm thinking, well, they should still be innocent enough that they believe this, but not in today's world, and so they don't believe
Well,
it.
I love that about how you read. I mean, I've noticed that in your podcast, like when you were talking with Sarah Bernstein and you talked about the chameleon in your past. So that was something that I like listening to your podcast for that reason, that you bring in your own experiences when you read. I think some people are like, okay, I need to solve this puzzle of a book, and they don't really think about other books they've read or past experiences. And that I just find really fascinating.
Yeah,
Specifically how you read.
my daughter is in Amsterdam, and my other daughter told her husband that Annie's in Amsterdam, and Lucy, who's 7, said, "Wait a minute, who's in Hamsterland?"
That's great.
So today, the king of Hamsterland wrote a letter to Lucy saying, "Hey, I heard you were interested in Hamsterland."
Yeah, that's really good.
And I sent pictures of hamsters sitting around the table. These are my kids, and they're sitting around the table.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's what Tolkien used to do with his kids and grandkids. Except I'm not like Tolkien. But then anyway, I wrote the letter, and I just actually, an hour before I was doing this, I was mailing that letter. So one review says, oh, why did she pick up the 2 hitchhikers? It really doesn't move the plot along, or something like that. It was silly. I can't remember where I read it. It might have been just in Kirkus. No, it wasn't in Kirkus. I don't know where it was, but I think they're very important. And I think as you're talking about the arc of her repentance, if you will, I think that's a very important part of it.
Right. I think it's critical. Those 2 characters swerve they pop her out of her little prison where they have new ideas and new challenges for her to have to overcome.
The
I
other
mean,
thing
it's
is,
really the first time she's ever talked to people outside of her own town.
I know, but then, whenever I read, I always have this tendency to go, okay, who's good, who's bad? That's why I like her aunt so much. And then I didn't like Penny because she took those 3 extra 20s,
Well, she's had a very tough life.
Yeah,
You just have to understand.
that's still dishonest, and she just got, whatever. And so she's a whatever kind of person.
It's true. I'm not even sure if she's that little girl's mother.
Oh. Who knows? You're the reader also. Who knows? So I guess to wind things up, I guess, and especially looking forward to reading your other book, I'm trying to explain this to other people, and I'm talking about poor dear, and I said it's not supernatural. It's, because I say he's in the corner telling her she's going to go to hell basically, and she's never going to be forgiven. It's not supernatural. It's, and I don't want to give too much away. I said it's psychological. It's not supernatural. But then, I thought of like Yeats's poem, The Second Coming, and I thought of, what rough beast, and the deer is that rough beast. And then I thought about what's going on in today's world, and it's exactly what's going on in today's world. Then I got all depressed. But that wasn't the book. That was just me.
Yeah, I think a poor dear is just another sufferer, a fellow sufferer, and a reflection of Margaret. I don't know. If you agree with the conceit that this 16-year-old savant is writing this story, then maybe she just made up poor dear on the spot to make a good story. But it's very possible. I hadn't really thought about that until just now. Actually, I have no idea what happened with poor dear.
And I think that's a good way to end it, Claire. I've asked so many questions, and I have lots more that I could ask, but what I'm going to tell my readers will be sitting prominently is that this is something that's different. It's something that you're going to have lots of different feelings about, but it's something that you really have to read. So to sell your book, hopefully that will go a long way towards it. So in conclusions, thank you so much, Claire, for being here. Thanks so much for writing Poor Dear, and I look forward to talking to you again.
I really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Claire. Bye-bye.